Hey, this is Julia. I'm here with my April wrap up. I'm gonna try and do this as quickly as possible because I did do reading vlogs for most of April that I will leave like in the eye above once like we get to the books that I finished in those weeks. But I don't want to do like a super long wrap up. I also just I don't know, I didn't want to do I don't want this wrap up to be too long, but I also like didn't have time to do a mid-month wrap up. So I'm gonna fly through these. If you want like in-depth reviews on each of these books, I post individual reviews of every single book that I read on my TikTok, which is always in the description, so you can go check those out. I have more content on there as well, but you'll have more in-depth reviews of these books. They are also spoiler free though, so in case you want that. And yeah, let's just begin with some stats. I read 9 books in total in the month of April, which amounts to 2,985 pages, which is an average of 99.5 pages per day and an average of 211.67 pages per book. Of the books that I read this month, 3 I owned, 4 were ebooks, 1 was a galley from NetGalley, and 1 was from the library. Then for ratings, I have 1 2-star, 3 3-stars, 4 2-stars, 5 3-stars, which amounts to an average rating of 3.78. And for age ranges, we have 2 young adult books and 7 adult books. I have 1 historical fiction novel, 6 contemporary novels, and 2 fantasies. Those are the stats. Quickly flew through them. The first book I finished in the month of April, I started this in March, is the Viscount Who Loved Me by Julia Quinn, which is the second book in the Bridgerton series. This was a reread. I give it 5 stars. I wanted to reread this book after I watched the show. I really liked the season, but like it wasn't my favorite, so that got me very much in the mood to reread this because this is one of my favorites. And look at the tabbing. I went wild, but I genuinely really love this one. I love Kate and Anthony as separate characters. I think they are like very great characters to follow. I love their romance so much. I think it is so well done, and I really like the angst that is presented in their relationship. I thought that's so well done. I really like the moments of them opening up to each other, but like their banter is also very funny, and I just had a blast rereading this book. I generally love my time rereading this book so much. And yeah, if you want to know more of my thoughts on this, I did do a full like series review for the Bridgerton series, so you can go watch that and I go more in depth about my thoughts of this book. Just know that I still absolutely love this and it's one of my favorites in this series. Then the next book that I read is Legendary by Stephanie Garber, which I gave 5 stars to. This is the second book in the Kagawa series. The first one I read in January, I believe, and I really loved. So I was super excited to get to this book, but I sadly didn't love it as much. We have a perspective switch in this one. We follow our main characters on the first book, her sister Stella, we follow in this one, and I just didn't really like her that much as a main character. I thought she was like a very like typical YA main character, and I just wasn't the biggest fan of her. I also thought she was very one-dimensional. Her love interest is also very one-dimensional, and I just didn't really feel the chemistry between them. And the plot, I just didn't like as much. I love the atmosphere of Kagawa in the first book. I was this magical situation, but like you don't know what's real and what's not and how the magic works. And I feel like this book like doesn't have that same atmosphere to it, and it doesn't have the same like special feeling to it. And it does explain a little bit of the magic, which I don't think necessarily ruined it, but it didn't work for me that well. And we do get introduced in this book into a new thing called the Fortunae, which is a element of this world that we haven't learned of until now. And I thought that was very interesting, and they played a huge part in this novel, but I feel like we barely got to know anything about them, so that also made me a little bit disappointed. Then the next book that I read is actually a novella, and that's Shadow's Legacy by Julia Kagawa, which I gave 5 stars. This is a like prequel novella to the Iron Fey Evenfall series, which is the 3rd series in this Iron Fey world by Julia Kagawa. And I originally wasn't really planning on reading this, but then my library app has it as an ebook, so I thought I'd just read it. Also, because I participate in the magical readathon this month, I'm not going like in depth of tropes of any in depth in like the different prompts, but like I had them in the back of my mind while reading, and one of the prompts is to read a book on 100 pages, so this fit perfectly for that. And it follows Ethan and Kenzie's wedding, and we get the perspective of Kieran, which honestly, I don't know why I originally didn't want to read this, because this honestly just sounds much more up my alley than the rest of the series has, because I love Kieran and Kenzie so much. I think they're my favorite characters from this world, so I really love seeing their wedding. And then Kieran, I have been intrigued into reading something from his perspective for a while. Like, I genuinely am campaigning for the third book in the Evenfall series to be in Kieran's perspective, because every book has been in a different perspective. And now, having read this novella in his perspective, I'm even more convinced on that train, because I love reading from his perspective. I think he's a very compelling character to follow. But even though I had fun reading this, I also feel like a large chunk of this was just a recap of the Call of the Forgotten series, which I didn't necessarily read because I read it last year, so that was still fresh in my brain. But I do understand that there was a large gap of time between publishing the two series, so that a lot of people might have appreciated the recap, but I just don't think it was integrated into the story as well, so it kind of just felt a bit boring and jarring, and which is why I like docked it to a 3-star. Then the next book that I read is Neon Gods by Katee Robert, which I gave 4 to 5 stars. I have heard amazing things about Katee Robert in general, and this book especially I have heard fun, like, great things about. It's been pretty hyped ever since it got released, and I honestly really enjoyed it. I was a bit scared because I know Katee Robert is very, like, smut heavy, and I think a lot of romances that I've read are a bit smut heavy, kind of feel like the author equates, like, sexual attraction to romantic attraction, and they really do a great job at developing romantic attraction, because they think, like, oh well, they're sexually attracted to each other, so romance between them must work out as well. And I don't like that, and I was a bit scared going into this book that this was gonna be that, but luckily it was not. I think Katee Robert did a great job at developing this relationship besides the smut as well, and I appreciated that. I really liked our 2 characters. I really liked Hades and Persephone as characters. I am not that familiar with Hades and Persephone's story. Like, I know the basics of it, but I'm not that familiar with it. I'm not that familiar with, like, all different retellings, so I know some people like this less because I don't think it's a great retelling of the original myth, but I honestly don't really care that much about how great of a retelling it is of something. I just had a blast reading this, and I liked the characters, and I liked the romance, I liked the steamy times, I liked everything about this. Then next I read the Flatshare by Beth O'Leary, which I gave 2 to 5 stars to. Again, this is a romance that has been very much hyped, and I wanted to pick this up because I recently heard on TikTok that this is getting adapted, so I wanted to have read it before it's getting the adaptation. And I honestly think this will make a great movie. Like, I think this will make a great rom-com, so I'm excited that it is getting adapted. But I personally wasn't the biggest fan of it. I really liked the first half. I think this book did a great job, like, setting our situation up, developing of, like, setting up these characters, like, and setting up the dynamic between the 2 leads, and they communicate to, like, post-it notes constantly, and I really loved the communication like that. The only thing about, like, the first half I didn't like is our main character's perspective, male main character's perspective. He was just written differently, and I just didn't really like how that perspective was written. I felt like it felt very jarring, and I just didn't really get along with it that well. And then the second half is when they actually, like, meet and the relationship develops, and I feel like that first half was so slow burn, and then in the second half everything happened so quickly, and I wanted that to kind of have the same pacing as the first half a little bit, just so it felt more like one cohesive book rather than, like, a book and then, like, very much rambling on. Then we have another book in the series of TikTok Made Me Read It, and that's The Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas, which I gave 2 to 5 stars to, and the gal I got from Bengali. This is such a hyped TikTok romance, and I wasn't the biggest fan of it. I think there is some good stuff at the core of this. Like, I really like the romance, I like the characters, I thought they had great tension between them, and I liked their banter and stuff like that. But I just feel like our main characters, like, in a monologue was too wordy. Like, so much was being said, but, like, none of it was important. Like, you could definitely reduce a lot of the inner monologue down to, like, 1 or 2 sentences and you would have the same effect, which caused for this book to feel very long and dragged out and just not that pleasant to read. Then next I read Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert, which gave 5 out of 5 stars. This perfection. I loved it so much. Again, Talia Hibbert is an author I've been meaning to read from for a while, because even though this is her most hyped series and I've seen most about the series, I have seen her talked about a lot in her more like I believe indie published work as well, and it just made me like super excited to read this. And did it disappoint. I genuinely really love Talia Hibbert's writing. Like, this is the definition of a rom-com book. Like, generally there's a great romance and there's great comedy. Like, I laughed out loud numerous times while reading this book because it's so funny, and the banter between Chloe and Rhett with the love interest is fantastic, it's phenomenal. I absolutely adored that banter and like how they interacted, and how this is kind of a hate to love, but like there was attraction from the beginning, but like they don't get along that much in the beginning, and seeing them like becoming friends, falling in love, stuff like that, it was so good for my soul. There are some more kind of like difficult moments in this book, but the overall tone of this book is very light. But for example, Red has a past abusive relationship, and he deals with kind of the trauma of that in this book, and that's dealt with very seriously, but it still manages to keep the overall tone of this book pretty light, which I always appreciate. I love Chloe, I love Red just as separate characters. I thought they were amazing characters to follow. I also loved Chloe's sisters in this book, which is great because that means I'll love the rest of the series, hopefully, because the other two books follow her sisters, and I love this so much. I even love the third conflict in this book. Do you know how rare it is for me to love a third conflict? Like, usually I'm very indifferent about them, but this one I really liked. Then next I read Electric Idol by Katee, which I gave 45 stars to. This is the sequel to Neon Gods, and this one is an Eros and Psyche retelling. And I really like this one. Again, I thought the romance was fantastic. I really loved Eros and Psyche as separate characters. I liked their romance. The romance was great. I really loved the romance in this one because I feel like, I don't know, I feel like this kind of took more of, not necessarily a slow burn, but kind of more, I don't know how to explain it. I feel like in the first book, like both of them, even though they were a little bit resistant of getting together, they did very quickly fall in love and were open to those feelings. This one definitely has the main characters kind of being like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. This was not on the agenda. And I quite like that aspect to it. I again thought this one had great steam. Like, the smartness is very different than in Neon Gods, but I still thought it was really well done and I liked it. Kind of the only thing I didn't really like about this book is you have Aphrodite who wants to kill Psyche in this entire book, and I just felt like that threat wasn't really there for me. It didn't really feel high stakes, and I didn't care about it as much as I should have probably, which is why I docked a star, because I genuinely, that's such a big part of the book, especially like in the third act, but it didn't do anything for me. And then lastly, the last book I read this month is yet another romance, because it was very much in a romance mood this month. Take a Hint, Dani Brown by Talia Hibbert, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars as well. This is a sequel to Get a Life, Chloe Brown, obviously. Love this one as well, of course. I like Chloe Brown a little bit more than this one, but this one was still fantastic. I loved Dani so much. I thought she was an amazing protagonist to follow. I also really loved Zav, who is like the love interest. These are dual perspectives, so I always feel weird preferring to one of them as a love interest and the other one as the main character. But I really loved both of them as like separate characters. Again, this book does like a great job at delving into like more hard-hitting topics while overall keeping the tone light, and I really like that. I love the romance. This is a friends to lovers like fake dating romance, which my fave, and this one does it so well. I feel like it does deliver on both of those aspects really well. I really like Dani has a bit of commitment issues in this book as well, and I really like how that was discussed and how it's like very different from how you see commitment issues typically in media, which is just something I really like. This felt more realistic. I also really like how Zav's anxiety is dealt with in this book. Thought it was great. I love again the banter dynamics between these two. Absolutely amazing. I feel like this one also has a bigger cast of side character than the first book, and I really liked all the side characters. I liked everything that was going on in this book. The only thing that made me like this less than Chloe Brown is that I felt indifferent about that conflict. That was it for today's like rapid fire reviews, but I honestly as long as I'm doing these weekly reading vlogs, I think I'm gonna keep doing my wrap-ups like this because I just enjoyed filming this so much more, and I'm sure that I'll enjoy editing this so much more as well, because it just, I don't know, I always feel stressed filming wrap-ups because I don't want them to get too long, but like they in its nature are very long because like you discuss everything in my books. But I am so far very happy with how this turned out. And yeah, let me know in the comments section below what you thought of this like new format of wrap-ups, as well as any of these books if you've read them, as well as the books you've read in April. And I guess I'll see you guys next time. Good bye.